The vase was my only sanctuary, a silent relic of a life I kept perfectly guarded. But when it shattered, I realized some things are worth more than human lives, and I was willing to sacrifice everything to prove it. The vase was an heirloom, a translucent, pale blue relic of the Qing dynasty that had survived revolutions, shipwrecks, and 3 generations of my family. It stood on a pedestal of obsidian in the center of my study, catching the late afternoon light like a trapped piece of sky. It was the only thing I truly loved, mostly because it was the only thing I owned that couldn't talk back, didn't need anything from me, and never let me down. Until this afternoon. I heard the crash from the kitchen, a sharp, violent shriek of shattering porcelain that echoed through the hardwood floors of the hallway. When I reached the doorway, the air was heavy with the smell of old dust. Elena stood frozen in the center of the room, her hands still raised, her face drained of all color. At her feet, my history, my pride, and my silence lay in 1,000 jagged, sapphire-tinted pieces. She turned to look at me, and for a second, I didn't see the woman I'd lived with for 2 years. I saw an intruder. I saw a clumsy, careless force of nature that had just deleted the most precious part of my sanctuary. Her breath hitched, her eyes swimming with apologies she hadn't yet voiced, but the damage was done. The vase wasn't just broken, it was obliterated. It slipped, she whispered, her voice trembling like a wire stretched to the breaking point. I was just dusting, and the cloth caught the rim and— "Get out," I said. My voice was eerily calm, a thin veneer of ice over a furnace of pure, blinding rage. "I can fix it," she stammered, stepping toward the debris, her hands reaching out as if she could magically knit the ceramic back together. "I'll call someone, an expert. I'll pay for it, please." "Don't touch it," I snapped, stepping into the room. I felt something shift inside me, a dark, heavy gear clicking into place. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about the history. I cared about the fact that she had violated the one thing I kept sacred. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the flicker of fear in her pupils. She finally realized that the man standing before her wasn't the man she had made breakfast for that morning. I looked past her, toward the hallway where her 6-year-old son Toby was playing with his wooden blocks. He was oblivious, humming a song to himself, unaware that his mother had just committed a capital offense in the eyes of a man who dealt in vengeance, not forgiveness. I looked at the boy, then back at Elena, and felt a cold, calculated smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "You want to fix it, Elena?" I asked, walking past her toward the hallway. "Fine. Let's see what you're really willing to sacrifice." I grabbed the heavy mahogany door handle and slammed it shut, locking us in the study. And as I turned the deadbolt, the small, innocent sound of Toby's laughter on the other side of the door suddenly stopped. The silence that followed the click of the lock was absolute. Elena lunged for the door, her fingernails clawing uselessly at the polished wood, but I moved with a fluidity that surprised even me. I caught her by the wrist, my grip firm, and spun her around to face the wreckage on the floor. "Look at it," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, rhythmic rasp. "Look at the shards. Do you see how they can never be whole again?" No amount of glue, no amount of expert restoration can ever bring back the soul of that vase. It's dead, Elena, just like the trust I had in you. She was sobbing now, great heaving gasps that made her tremble, but I didn't feel a flicker of pity. The anger had crystallized into a singular, sharp obsession. I walked to my desk and pulled open the top drawer, my hand closing around the cool, heavy steel of a metal paperweight, a solid, jagged chunk of brass. "You think this is about a piece of pottery," I murmured, pacing the small perimeter of the room. "But it's about the lack of care. You've always been reckless with my things, with my space, with my peace. And now, you've taken the one thing I kept locked away from the world." She backed away until her spine hit the bookshelves, her eyes darting between me and the door I had just locked. The muffled sound of Toby's voice drifted through the wood, a confused, small cry. "Mommy? Why is the door locked? Mommy, I want to come in." My heart didn't stutter. It didn't soften. It beat with the steady, chilling precision of a metronome. I looked at Elena, and I saw the realization dawn on her, a look of pure, unadulterated terror that told me she finally understood the scale of the game we were playing. "You broke my beautiful thing," I said, stepping closer, my shadow looming over her. "So, I'm going to take something of yours. Something that matters far more than a vase. Something that you'll never be able to replace, no matter how hard you cry." I turned my back on her and gripped the handle of the door. The wood felt cold, vibrating with the frantic, rhythmic thumping of the little boy on the other side. Elena let out a strangled, incoherent scream, scrambling to her feet to stop me, but I shoved her back with a force that sent her crashing into the mahogany shelves. "Don't worry," I said, my hand on the lock, my eyes fixed on the threshold of the room. "I'm not going to hurt him, Elena. Not yet. But I'm going to make sure that from this moment on, you understand exactly what it feels like to lose the only thing that gives your life meaning." I turned the key. As the door creaked open, the first thing I saw was Toby's small, bewildered face looking up at me, holding a jagged piece of the blue porcelain he'd managed to find in the hallway, the final, largest shard of the vase, in his small, trembling hand. The boy stood there, his small knuckles white as he clutched the lethal, sapphire blue sliver. It was the rim of the vase, the most delicate part, and he held it like a trophy. He looked at me with a confusion so profound it almost bordered on pity. He didn't understand that he was holding the catalyst for a tragedy. He didn't understand that in my world, there were no accidents, only debts that had to be settled in full. "I found it, mister," he chirped, his voice vibrating with the terrifying innocence of childhood. "I think it's pretty. Can we put it back together?" Behind me, Elena was a wreck of gasping sobs, her body sliding down the bookshelf until she hit the floor. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was paralyzed by the sight of her son holding the very thing that had signed his doom. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, her lips moving without sound. She was begging for mercy, but mercy had left this house the moment the porcelain hit the floor. I stepped out into the hallway, looming over the boy. I didn't reach for the shard. I reached for his shoulder. My hand felt heavy, alien, and cold. When I squeezed, I felt the small, fragile bone beneath his shirt, and a strange, jagged thrill shot up my arm. "Pretty, isn't it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I could feel Elena's gaze burning into my back, a silent, desperate prayer hanging in the air. "Yes," Toby replied, his eyes wide. "It's like the ocean." "The ocean is deep, Toby," I said, crouching down to his level. I took the shard from his hand, my skin grazing his. I felt his pulse, rapid and shallow, a tiny, frantic bird trapped in a cage. And if you're not careful, it pulls you under. It takes things. It breaks things. And sometimes, it never lets them come back up. I stood up and walked toward the top of the staircase. The house was deathly quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer, counting down the seconds of a life that would never be the same. Elena had scrambled to the doorway, her hands clutching the doorframe, her knuckles bloodless. She looked as though she were holding the house together with her sheer will. "Don't," she managed to choke out. "Please, anything else. Take the money, take the car, take the house. Just let him go." I turned, a slow, deliberate movement. I looked at the grand staircase, then back at the boy. I walked over to the banister and looked down into the dark, marble-tiled foyer below. It was a long drop, hard, unforgiving, and absolute. "You offered me a trade, Elena," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "But you're offering me things that can be replaced. Money, cars, property. Those are just hollow shells. You destroyed my soul in a vase, so I think it's only fair that I show you what it feels like to watch your own heart stop beating." I reached out and took Toby's hand. He didn't pull away. He trusted me. He still thought this was a game. He looked up at me with a smile, a genuine, trusting smile that made the bile rise in my throat, and in that moment, I realized I had crossed a line from which there was no return. I pulled him toward the edge of the landing, the cold metal of the banister biting into my palm, and as Elena let out a scream that sounded like a soul being torn in half, I felt the floorboards groan beneath our feet. "Do you want to see how the ocean works, Toby?" I asked, and with a sudden violent shove, I felt his small hand slip from my grip. The scream that ripped from Elena's throat was not a sound of human grief. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. Toby didn't plummet, not at first. As I shoved him toward the void, the momentum caused him to stumble forward, his small feet catching on the edge of the ornate runner rug. He teetered, his arms windmilling in the air, his face twisting from confusion to absolute, soul-shattering terror. For a heartbeat, he hung suspended over the foyer, his eyes locked onto mine, not with love, but with the sudden, jagged realization of what I was. Then he slipped. But he didn't fall to the marble. He caught the brass-knobbed railing with both hands, his small body swinging out over the empty space like a pendulum. His legs kicked at the empty air, his weight straining against his tiny shoulders. I stood there, frozen. The madness that had fueled me for the last hour suddenly evaporated, replaced by a vacuum of cold, nauseating reality. I looked at my hands. They were trembling, not with rage, but with the sudden, violent clarity of a man waking from a fugue state. "Mommy!" the boy shrieked, a sound so high and thin it pierced my eardrums. Elena was moving. She didn't look like a woman anymore. She was a blur of primal force. She sprinted past me, her shoulder slamming into my chest with enough force to knock the air from my lungs. She reached the railing, throwing herself onto the floorboards, her fingers locking onto Toby's wrists just as his grip began to fail. The sound of his knuckles popping, a dry, sickening crack, echoed through the house. I stood paralyzed as she hauled him up. She didn't look at me. She didn't scream at me. She just clutched the boy to her chest, sobbing into his hair, rocking back and forth on the landing. Toby was screaming, his face purple, his small frame shuddering with the terror of a child who had looked into the eyes of a monster and seen his own end. I backed away, retreating into the shadow of the study. My foot crunched on a shard of the blue porcelain. I looked down. The pieces were just ceramic, dust and fire. They were nothing. The front door slammed open. I heard the sirens before I saw the lights, but it didn't matter. The police were already at the gate. Someone must have heard the commotion from the street. I walked to the obsidian pedestal, now empty and meaningless, and sat down on the floor. I didn't reach for a weapon. I didn't try to hide. I just waited. I heard the thundering of boots on the stairs, the shouting, the sound of Elena sobbing the name of the man she thought she knew, and the terrifying, broken whimpers of a child who would never again sleep without the lights on. When the officers finally stormed the room, guns drawn, they found me sitting amidst the blue ruins, staring at the empty air where the vase used to be. I didn't offer a defense. I didn't ask for a lawyer. I just held up my wrists, the brass paperweight still clutched in my hand, stained with the dust of something I had loved more than my own humanity. As they dragged me out, I looked back once. Elena was standing at the top of the stairs, her son shielded behind her legs. She wasn't crying anymore. She was looking at me with a gaze colder than anything I had ever possessed, a look of pure, glacial hatred. In that look, I saw my sentence. I didn't need a judge or a jury. The way she stared at me, the way she wiped my existence from her eyes, was the only punishment that would last forever. I hadn't just broken her sun, I had shattered the mirror of my own soul, and as the heavy steel doors of the patrol car closed behind me, I knew that in the silence of my cell, I would spend the rest of my life picking up the shards.